This is me going live with the ADHD teacher. I want to go ahead and just go ahead and give you an idea of basically what it's like to be a person with ADHD. I think a few people will be following here in just a few minutes, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Got a little bit of a disclaimer before I really get started into me talking about everything that life with ADHD is like for me. It's just that it is my experience. Okay, so the experiences that I'm going to share are exclusive to me. However, some of these experiences may be things that are shared among those other folks that out there that have ADD or ADHD. But it manifests itself in a myriad of different ways. I would say that I probably have a mild to moderate case of ADHD. I have actually officially been diagnosed with adult ADHD. I was diagnosed, I'm thinking probably three or four, maybe 5 years ago. It was when I was still working in Orange County when I finally went and actually got diagnosed. So anyway, like I said, I'm going to talk about all of this as we go through this particular video. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My ADHD has been a part of my life, my entire life. We didn't know what it was called at the time when I was growing up in the 80s. I mean, ADHD was known about at that time, but it wasn't as widely recognized. It wasn't as widely recognized at that point. So a lot of times, students who had ADHD were overlooked as just being rambunctious or out of control, or a lot of other phrases that were used that were thrown about that really didn't encompass the actual situation. I was a very, very hyperactive kid. It was my uncle. He talked about me being basically a little electron running around. He basically would say I would come running out of left field and talk about how honeybees pollinate flowers and this, that, and the other, and then I would go running off in the other direction, doing 15 million different other things. When I got into school, my second year in first grade was a little rough. I got held back in first grade, and the official ruling was that I was immature. And who knows? I mean, maybe I was a little bit immature, but really, when I look back now and at all of the reasonings behind why they held me back, it all stems from my ADHD. I had a very hard time focusing. I talked a lot. One of the things that I definitely remember is that when I was sitting in a chair, I just didn't feel comfortable. All I wanted to do was move. And one of the things that I would often do, which drove my teacher to the brink on a regular basis, was I always had a pencil case. And it was one of those hard pencil cases with the little latch and everything. And I would intentionally knock my pencil box off of the table and onto the floor so that all of my pencils would scatter everywhere. And that would give me an excuse to get up. And now I needed to clean up all those pencils. And it was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. Well, I did. But, of course, that's not what I said. And it wasn't that, I wanted to be disruptive. Is that I just couldn't sit still. And so I would get down and I pick up all my pencils and I put them back in the case, and 15, 20, 30 minutes later, oops, my pencil box is on the floor again. So you can imagine how frustrating that might be for a teacher. I know, being a teacher, I struggle sometimes when students, get rowdy and rambunctious and out of control, and I try to take my own situation into account and try to recognize that everybody has their own situation. So I try to be better about it. But as a teacher, I can assure you there are times when I have been frustrated, and it's just the way it goes. But one of the reasons that I'm doing this video is that I want to make people more aware of what it's like to have ADHD. As I said, it was difficult in school. I had a hard time focusing. I was always into some sort of activity, and I want to tell parents out there, teachers out there, people who work with kids that have ADHD. Definitely, you want to allow these people to be as active as possible and do the things that seem to help them. One of the things that always helped me when I got into high school and I still do it today, is my photography. I've now jumped into cooking as well. To the benefit of my wife, cooking has definitely helped curb some of my ADHD. But anyway, so as you can see, I'm going to kind of bounce around from idea to idea, and that's just kind of the way my brain works. So it's like I'll start off on one track, and I may wander off to another, and then come back to the original thought process. So I hope that doesn't drive anybody too completely crazy. But once I got into high school, it was a little bit easier because I kind of made some of my own decisions. College was tough. Because I had a lot of things going on, and when I got into the military, I want people to understand that when I got into the military, I almost didn't make it through basic training, and part of it had to do with some of my ADHD. One of the things that I got knocked down for a lot was the fact that I could not remember to lock my wall locker, which is where we kept all of our stuff, and so it was really funny because that wasn't funny at the time, but it's funny now. I had a lot of my stuff thrown out the barracks windows because that's what the drill sergeants would do when they found your wall locker unlocked, and that was a problem in its own right, because we have to maintain security and everything. But I did one time actually leave my weapon behind at a range because I was just moving too fast. I basically got done firing at the range, and they wanted to, you had to check all your gear and everything and make sure you didn't have any brass or ammo, and you had to collect yourself. And the whole time that you're doing this, they're counting down from 10, 9, 8. And if they get down to 0 and you don't have all your stuff and you're back in formation, you're getting everybody in trouble. So, here I am packing up all my stuff and throwing everything into my bags, and it was, I thought I had everything, and I go running back, and they're down to 5, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got everything done in 5 seconds, and I'm back in formation. And then I look around and I notice that everyone has their M16. Except me. And I look back, and of course my drill sergeant's got it above his head, and that was, let's just say that was a moment when things got pretty real for me in the military, and I was able to overcome it and get past it, but it was definitely scary. And there was a moment when the drill sergeant was telling me, I don't think you're going to make it through basic training. So that was a big deal for me. So, like I said, I'll jump back to school. After I got out of my, first grade the first time, and then was in first grade the second time, I did actually have a teacher that did not understand what it was like to have a student with ADHD. And at one point, I was actually hit with a book on top of my head because she thought that I was turning around talking, which was a regular thing for me, but I was just bored and I was looking out the window, and as I was looking out the window, she thought I was talking, and she came up behind me and she hit me in the head with a book. And things have changed. Teachers hopefully don't do that much anymore. But there's a big stigma. There was, at least when I was a kid, there was a big stigma on the idea of being mature and not being rowdy and rambunctious, and that there was something. For a long time, I felt like there was something wrong with me. And it's not something that's wrong with me. It's just a state of being. It's just part of who I am. My brain chemistry, the way my brain absorbs dopamine, is different than your average person. From what I understand from the research that I've done, my brain and people who have ADHD, our brain absorbs dopamine much faster, and that means we're constantly having to be active. We're constantly having to find stimulation because that we're not getting that dopamine release, or we're not having it as long as someone else does. And so that's why when you see people who are taking medication for ADHD, often it's a dopamine uptake inhibitor. Basically, it allows the dopamine to stay in your system, longer, closer to the time that an average person's dopamine would be uptaken by their brain. So it took me a long time to realize that, all these things that were going on, it wasn't me as a person being broken. It wasn't me as a person, not functioning correctly. It was just the way my brain processed things. And the more opportunities that I had to find things that kept my attention, the more I was able to get past some of this. I have taken ADHD medication in the past, and actually I'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But I'm not currently taking ADHD medication, and it's tough. As a teacher trying to stay focused and having ADHD, I do find that it's tough sometimes. Keeping everything on task and organized. If you walk into my classroom is a pretty good indication that I have ADHD, especially my desk and behind my desk. It's a mess. But it's one of those messes where it's like I can walk in and tell you where everything is. Anybody else looking at it looks at it as a giant pile of disheveled papers. I do see a few people have joined us. Layla, I'm glad to see that you're watching, and Christina, I'm glad to see that you're watching. I really am just getting started here. I've just told a couple of random stories of what ADHD was like as a kid and as a teenager. So I'm starting to get into the way it affects me as a teacher. One of the things about the way ADHD affects me is that I'm very creative, and I love to make lessons. I love to find a way to make my lessons active and get the kids up and moving and get them thinking, those deeper questions. And I really enjoy the creative process. One of the downfalls of ADHD, though, is that if I get bored with a topic or get bored with a project, often it doesn't get finished. It's one of those things. You ever met someone who they've got 15 million projects and they're gung ho about every single one of them, and then the next time you talk to them, they've only completed maybe 4 of them, and the rest of them are just kind of gone by the wayside. That's a good indication that person may have ADHD, because I often, will start a project, have this great idea at hand, and things will be going perfectly, and then I lose interest, and that's tough as a teacher. But it helps me, create a lot of really fun and engaging lessons. The hardest part for me is probably grading papers. Because by the time I've done the whole fun, exciting lesson and everything, the kids have had a great time. They're talking, and I get a lot of my feedback from the interactions that they have, less so the paperwork and all of that, because I often, we want to assess our students and we want to find out what they learn specifically, but I often find that I know more of what my students learned from the interactions that they had in class than I do what they put down on a paper. But as a teacher, I do have to grade papers, and so that's an everyday struggle. And I want people to understand, at least in my experience with ADHD, it's not that we're lazy. I got that a lot. You're lazy, or you're procrastinating. And it's not me being lazy. It's not me not wanting to do it. It's just not being able to. That sitting down and imagine sitting down and having 100 papers to look at. And every single other thing that you have to think about in your day is running through your brain at the exact same time, and you have absolutely no control as to which part of your day your brain focuses on. And I tell you, it increases your anxiety immensely, because you've got to sit down and get these grades in, and you've got to get them in a certain amount of time, because if you don't, then you're going to hear from parents and you're going to hear from faculty, and they're gonna let you know that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And yet, not having the ability to shut off your brain and look at the job at hand. And that's one of the ways that I explain ADHD. One of the other ways is kind of the way I've ended up finally going and getting help. I was in Orange County, and I was actually working a second job, because as any teachers know, that we don't make a whole lot of money. So I was working a second job, and I was sent a menu. I was supposed to pick out sushi. And I want you to understand something. I'm going to tell this story to kind of complete the story I'm telling now. When I was a kid, I read everything. And I mean everything. I was a very accelerated reader. Even though I got held back in first grade, I was moved up in reading classes. At fifth grade, I was reading college level books. Sixth grade, I was surpassing college level reading. I read The Hobbit in about a day and a half. So that just gives you an idea of how, and I'm not trying to brag here. I'm just saying that this, I was a reader. I am still a reader. And I ended up getting this menu at work to pick out sushi, and I couldn't do it. And it wasn't because I couldn't read what was on the page. It's that I couldn't focus long enough on any one item on that page. I saw the page as a whole. It was like looking at the page and getting every single bit of information at the exact same time, because I couldn't pick something to stay focused on long enough to make a decision as to what I wanted. And it got so frustrating to the point that I'm at this second job and I'm almost in tears. And I realized that was the moment that I needed help, because I couldn't even make a decision as to what I wanted to eat that night, and it was bringing me to my knees, because I couldn't make myself focus. And I want people to understand that I don't have, at least in my own opinion, I don't have severe ADHD. I have moderate to mild, between mild and moderate, or right up to moderate. So I don't have the worst case scenario with this, and yet I couldn't, as an adult, make a decision on a menu. And that's kind of a something that people should look at when they're dealing with someone who has ADHD. It's it can be debilitating. But it's also, like I said, it's also something very, very positive. It keeps me going on a regular basis, finding new things, and I've got this constant need to learn new things and to do new things. If you have a child who has ADHD or you think might have ADHD, getting them out and doing more things and physical things, thinking things that interest them, it's going to help. When, like right now, what I've been doing every weekend is I've been going out into the woods and taking photos. I get up early in the morning and I go out and I shoot photos. And that helps focus me, and it helps focus me for the rest of the week, because that moment of being by myself, going out and doing something that I enjoy, doing something that I can focus on and be creative with, and it doesn't have a time limit, it doesn't have a deadline. It calms me, and it makes me feel better, and allows me to work better throughout the rest of the week. So my only suggestion for those, if you know someone who has ADHD, or you have children that have ADHD, is, find those things that they're interested in that don't necessarily pressure them. I work very well under pressure, which is funny, and that does tend to be a trait of ADHD, but I don't necessarily like to feel that type of pressure. So it's a double-edged sword. You've got to keep them active, you've got to keep them entertained, but you also have to find a way to take some of that pressure off of them. It's just there's just a lot going on in our heads, and we have a real hard time figuring out what's the most important thing, and even when we do figure it out what the most important thing is, we can't always make that our top priority. So those are some of the things that I've gone through, and that kind of make me who I am. So one of the things I do want to say, though, is that I am very positive about my ADHD. So don't let it define you as a person. Let it be a part of your personality. Let it be a part of your the way you think. But don't allow it to be something that's going to be a hindrance to you, to the point where you start to feel like there's something wrong with you. You've got to go out and you've got to find those things that you love. I'm having one ADHD moment right now. I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is I want to say. There's a lot of things that I want to say, and I'm trying to organize my thoughts. But that's where I was going with this. Is that I'm a teacher, and I am a fairly successful teacher in my own opinion. And even though I have ADHD, it hasn't stopped me from living my life. I have a lot of times I have an administrator come in and they'll tell me, they're like, man, you really are able to adjust on the fly, and you're able to basically dance around things and find a way to make the lesson work even when things go wrong. And that's one of the great things about ADHD, is that I do tend to tap dance well. I think well on my feet, and I come up with ideas almost instantaneously, but I don't like to do that. I do it well, but I don't always like to do that. One of the things that I do that helps me when I go to school is I usually show up at school about 7:30, 7:45, and our students don't come in until 9:07, 9:08. And the reason that I'm there so early isn't that because I'm organized, isn't because I am prepared. It's quite often the opposite. I'm not organized, and so I have to sit down and take that time to organize what my lesson's gonna do that day. I've set up my lesson plan, but I haven't laid out my classroom, or I haven't had an opportunity to sit down and really look at how I want to have these interactions with my students. And so I take that time in the morning to sit down and really refocus myself for the day, and that helps me. So giving someone extra time who has ADHD to do something, that is a blessing to them. I'm going to tell you right now, most people with ADHD, it's going to take, even though that we think really fast and we do things impulsively, we need extra time because of all those impulses, because of all those things that draw our attention away. We've got to be able to sit down and have some time to figure out what our priorities are for that particular moment. Because if we don't, there's a good chance that we're gonna get lost in our own thoughts and our own ideas, and we're not going to be able to get the things done that we want to get done at that time. So it's definitely definitely good to give them extra time. I try to plan things out well in advance, even though often I end up doing my lesson plans the week before, or the Friday before they're due. But if I get the opportunity to plan things out in advance, that definitely helps reduce some of that stress to me, because even though I know that my lesson plans are not going to go exactly as they're planned, which as a teacher that your lesson plans are not going to go always to plan, but the better planned you are, the better it's going to be when you have those unplanned moments, because you're able to shift gears and adjust as necessary. But like I said, I've had a lot of principals and administrators say, "Oh, you think really well on the fly," and I think that's where my ADHD comes in as a blessing, but it can also be a curse sometimes. But it really is a double-edged sword. There's so much that I can say about how this has been difficult, but it's also something that every time I turn around, it's opened up doors for me in ways that I never expected. I understand my students a lot better. One of the things that I try to do in my classroom is, one of the things I do is I fidget. I fidget a lot. I don't tend to be a person who beats on the desk though, and that's something that some people who have ADHD, they sit down and they drum and they want to move, and or your kinesthetic, even your kinesthetic learners, even those that aren't ADHD but need to move to think. One of the things that I've found that helped in my classroom is I have these things called beater busters. They're basically I get carpet samples from the local carpet store, and they're usually free. And if a kid is one that needs to bang on the desk to think, I give them a beater buster. They can bang on that carpet all afternoon, and it's not going to drive me or the person sitting next to them crazy because the carpet muffles it, but it gives them that outlet to move. I recently was talking to a friend of mine online, and she was asking me, talking to me about what they can do to help their child in school, and definitely when you talk to your students' teachers first, because your teachers are going to be your frontline defense with this. And if they're a good teacher, they're going to give that student those accommodations, whether they have a 504 plan or not. They're going to understand that student needs a little bit of extra, whatever it is that they need. So having Christina, I'm going to go ahead and just throw you under the bus here, because Christina is the one I was talking to, and it's her child has what she called a safety bag, which I think is such a fantastic idea. It's a calming safety bag. It has items that help her child stay calm. Little fidget tools, Play-Doh or silly putty, or I've seen some really neat ones where they've got little clickers, or there's a little square thing. It's a cube, and it's got like a whole bunch of different things that they can fidget with. It's just basically a fidget toy, and it allows them to have that movement, that fidgeting, without it being disruptive. And that's huge. Is that it's that you can't, when you take away someone who has ADHD, when you take away their ability to move or do whatever it is that helps keep them focused, you are going to put a huge amount of stress on them, and you're likely to get the problem is likely to get worse. You can't yell at a student and make them stop being ADHD. You can't, a parent can't, discipline their child and suddenly make them not ADHD. It doesn't work that way. It's the way our brain functions. We have no control over that. We have control over our actions, but the ability to maintain, those actions for a long period of time, that's where we run into that difficulty. And so having those outlets where we're able to move or fidget or do something that's going to keep our attention while still paying attention, that's going to help that student a lot. One of the things that, I have students that like to doodle, and I was a doodler too. When I go to a meeting, and I sit and I'm usually, doodling something on my page, and a lot of times people think that I'm not listening. And I actually am hearing every single thing that's being said, and I'm able to respond and give feedback and give legitimate answers to questions. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because I'm drawing, because I'm doodling, because I'm fidgeting, because my brain needs so much extra stimuli that if I'm not getting that, it actually makes me listen and think slower, or not at all, if I'm not able to fidget or do something. And so, ADHD people tend to be multitaskers, and of course you have to limit some of that because sometimes you do have to spend specific attention on something. But if you notice that they're doing something and it doesn't seem to hinder their learning process, or it doesn't seem to disrupt the class or anything like that, then really you should try and allow that to happen, because if that's helping them think and do better in school, then what's the harm in that? And that's kind of a new way of thinking, because we want to, a lot of times teachers in the classroom, they want all their kids doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And while that's sometimes that's the dream, that's not always the reality. And it's something that a lot of teachers, even myself, sometimes I have to relearn it myself, because some of the things that my students do, if I am able to channel that into productive outlets, I'm going to get more out of that student by allowing them to do some of those things that would be considered unstandard or non-standard, than if I make them comply to what the norm is. And so it's kind of a learning process for me, because I look at things that help me and I try to apply that to how I teach my students. And I have to learn not just about ADHD. I have to learn about OCD. I have to learn about defiancy disorders. I have to learn about what's going on at home with my students, what's going on outside with my students. There's nothing to teaching more than sitting down and getting to know who your students are. And it's the same way with kids. I mean, if you have your own kids, if they have ADHD, the thing that I could say it probably is the best thing that you could do is talk to them. Sit down and find out have them explain to you what their brain feels like, what their thought processes feel like. Because when I was in school, no one ever asked me why I was doing what I was doing in a way that made me feel comfortable, and that what I was doing wasn't necessarily wrong. I was pulled into, I was given detentions. I was never really a discipline problem. I was never a bad kid, but I was in trouble a lot for talking. I was in trouble a lot for being up and out of my seat, or fidgeting, or being mildly disruptive. I was never trying to get that kind of attention, but I'd shout out a lot because I knew the answer and I was so excited, and it was tough to have that impulse control not to do some of those things. And no one ever sat down with me and said, Chris, what is it that is making you feel like you need to do this? And I would have loved it if they had, because I'm not sure I could have articulated it, as a grade schooler or even a middle schooler. But by the time I got to high school, I definitely could have articulated it quite a bit better than then, and might have made a big difference for me. But I'm not complaining, because my life is fantastic. I have a lovely job. I love teaching. I have a lovely wife. I have a beautiful son, who I hope he may end up ADHD like me too. I hope not, but at least if he does have it, then I'll be able to impart some of this wisdom to him as well. But definitely just talking to kids and giving them that opportunity to figure out what works best for them, because if you are able to unlock that your student or your child, that's going to make a huge difference in their life, and helping them to understand that ADHD is not a fault. It's a state of being. It's just part of who they are, and they think a little bit differently than everyone else, and I think that's what makes people great. When you sit into a room with a bunch of people, and it's a perfect example is my lovely wife. She's chiming in right now. She says, I have the ability to make order out of chaos, and I hope that I do. Sometimes I have the ability to make chaos out of order too. but definitely, another thing is if you have ADHD, you've got to seek out. First off, never be afraid to ask for help. That was one of the things that I was afraid to do. Number one, I didn't know who to talk to for help until I'd seen a video one time of people who were talking about having ADHD and how they had talked to counselors and stuff like that, and that's what drove me to talk to a counselor in Orange County, and was, sure enough, I went through all the tests and was diagnosed with ADHD. But never be afraid to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not weakness. It's actually strength. It's knowing when you need help. But also seek out people who you feel like make you better. My wife and I are very different people. She's far more organized than I am, and more level-headed on most things, and she balances me out. And part of the reason that she balances me out is because she doesn't fault me for being or having ADHD. She understands that I think differently, and she loves me for it. She doesn't try to change it. She doesn't try to say, okay, well, you need to fix this. It's all right. You're struggling with this. What can I do to help? Do you need to go out and shoot photos? Do you need to sit down and play a game? Do you need to, have some of that time to yourself? And I try to do the same thing for her, because she's a very different person than I am. So I try to give her, what she needs as well. And that's really the key to that. Is just finding people who, number one, you can make those connections with, but who also make you feel good about yourself. Now, I'm not saying go out and get a bunch of lackeys who, tell you that you're wonderful every moment of the day. My wife will tell me, all right, you got to get it together, honey. but it's never in a way that makes me feel like I'm not good enough. And that's one of the things that we, as a society, need to work on. Because, and I think we're getting better at it, but there is no normal. I mean, no one is normal. Everyone has their own situation. Everyone has their own, battles that they're fighting. And so we need to find a way to build each other up and make those connections with each other, because those connections often, even though we seem very opposite, sometimes they're the best thing. That being with someone who's opposite, as long as they love you for your being opposite, it makes some of the best relationships. Like I said, my wife is, very, very detailed, but sometimes I break her out of her rut. She'll be in a rut, and I'm like, all right, we need to do something different. And I pull her up, and we go and do something different, and she thanks me for it. And then when I'm constantly doing something that's crazy, and she pulls me aside and says, okay, all these things are good, but let's go ahead and figure out one specific thing that you need to do. And she grounds me, and not grounds me like ground the good way, as in she helps me get my head out of the clouds, and focus on the things that are most important. So it's a balance in those types of relationships. So I don't know. I've seen a few people have logged on. Does anyone have any questions about ADHD or the or what we can do, what they can do with their child, or how to do something in the classroom or whatever? I mean, I'm open to any questions. Like I said, my brain is pretty fragmented. I'm sure there's other things that I wanted to say that I haven't said, and this isn't the only time that I have to talk about it. I mean, I guess this is my ADHD channel, so I could bring it up at a later date. But since I'm talking about it now, does anyone have any questions or suggestions or anything that they'd like to know or talk about? Or well, anyway, so like I said, just teaching strategies. Okay, teaching strategies with for someone who has ADHD, definitely giving them the opportunity to choose. One of the things that we've been talking about in our school is that student choice and voice. Giving them the opportunity to say, I want to do a project, but I want to do it my way. Okay, so maybe they could do a poster, maybe they could do a video, maybe they could do anything. Basically anything that shows that their mastery of the subject, of the project. And that's hard as teachers because sometimes it's tough because we have 130 kids. When we have the same type of project over and over and over again, it makes it pretty easy to grade, but that's not always the best way for that kid. And if they can show mastery in a way that's outside of the normal box, then I say go for it. Another thing is that giving them the opportunity to move. And that's tough too. One of the we do a lot with the station rotations now at our school, which I think I fought against it at first, but now I'm starting to see the merits of them. But giving the kids opportunities to get up, move around, move to a different part of the classroom, even just a different setting sometimes, even if it's 2 feet away from where the original setting was. But it's different lighting, or it's a different chair, or if it's a different, area of the room, it can make a huge difference because that change in perspective sometimes can jumpstart someone's brain. And that's not just a strategy for someone who has ADHD. That's just a strategy with kids. But as someone who has ADHD, I can tell you the times that I remember the most when I was in school was when I was given that opportunity to move and to choose the things that I wanted to do and show things in a way that made sense to me. And my wife, she just jumped in. Do you feel better on medication or without? And that's tough. And that's something definitely. I'm glad she brought that up because that's something I do want to talk about. Medication, and especially with kids, it's tough because I was on Adderall for a while, and I'm on the lowest dose of Adderall you could have, and I wanted to stay that way because I don't want because it can change your personality. It can affect the way you feel. The lowest dose that of Adderall that I was taking, basically, it took the edge off of my anxiety. It took the edge. It allowed me to sit down, and focus on one task at a time. With kids, it's tough because their body chemistry is changing all the time, and like even as an adult, they changed the formulation on the Adderall that I was taking, and it made me sick. It gave me terrible migraines. It made me feel. It made my heart race, and so I ended up not taking it anymore. And I tried to talk to my doctor about getting a different prescription for a different medication, and unfortunately, the one that he prescribed was not covered very well by my insurance, and it was way too expensive. It was far too expensive for me to take. So I've been unmedicated for several months now, and it's tough because I found that the medication does help me, but it's also not worth me feeling sick, having brutal headaches, and having my heart race, because I do want to survive. So I am going to look into different medications. That's actually a perfect example of ADHD. My doctor has said if I go and talk to the pharmacy and find out which medications are covered best by my insurance, then he'll prescribe me whatever they would be the most affordable for me. And I haven't done it. And it's not that I don't want to do it or that I'm lazy, it's that I just haven't been able to focus long enough to go and do it. And that's the insidious part about ADHD, is that sometimes you just can't bring yourself to do something, even though you really need to. But with kids, definitely talk to your doctors regularly, and talk to your child when they're on medication. If they don't feel good, that you need to make them clear that they need to be able to talk to you about that, because my nephew was a perfect example. He was the doctor kept prescribing him higher and higher doses instead of looking at what was going on, and he almost killed him. He made his heart race and had a really bad reaction to it, and it was because that doctor wasn't paying attention to what he needed. So the best thing I can say is talk to your child, and ask them questions, and make them feel comfortable telling you exactly what they're feeling when they're feeling it, because that's when you're going to be able to make the decision: is this medication working? Does it need to be raised or lowered? Does it need to be a completely different medication? And don't get comfortable with it, because as a child's body chemistry changes, so will the way that the drug affects it. So allow that child to regularly talk to you about what they're feeling, so that if that medication does need to be adjusted because of the way their body chemistry is working, then that needs to be done. Let's see if I got a few more questions here. Do you feel more or less like yourself? Again, with the medication, because I have such a low dose, it helps me a lot when I am on it. I do feel much more like myself when I'm on it, because I'm able to focus on the things that I know are important. However, I've never had the experience of being on a dose like I've seen some of my students. I had a student in the past who, I hate to say it, but he was medicated to the point where he blinked slow. I worry about that, because it's something that can really affect a person's personality. I had one of my cousins, early on when they started, diagnosing ADD and ADHD. He said he stopped taking. I think he was on Ritalin, because it turned him into a completely different person. And as a matter of fact, my nephew, who recently, like I said, he was the one that the doctor, almost killed because of it. But it some of the medications that they had him on made him extremely rageful, and he's a very, very pleasant, very loving child, but the medication made him angry. And so it's, like I said, it's tough with children. Definitely, I would suggest talking to your doctor, talking to behavioral therapists who can also suggest techniques over medications, especially with children, because children's body chemistry fluctuates so much. Like I said, don't take any medical advice from me. Talk to your doctors. That's the biggest thing I can say. But strategies are good for anyone. So coping strategies, how to deal with situations in which you feel stressed out, dealing with organization. Finding ways to organize not only your materials but your thoughts. Finding ways to self-advocating where the child is able to go up and talk to a teacher and say, I'm struggling with this. I think it may be part of my ADHD. Can I get more time on this, or can you help me with this because I'm having a hard time focusing? So definitely not just medication, because I don't always advocate medication. It worked for me, but it may not be the right thing for your child. And again, that's where I say that communication is huge. Talk to your child, because they're going to be able to tell you what they do and they don't like. So anyway, I think I've been talking for quite a long time. At least it feels like I've been talking for quite a long time. I do want to say, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like my Facebook page, the ADHD Teacher. Also, I will be uploading this video to YouTube, and so you can feel free to follow the Facebook page. But also, if you're better on YouTube or like YouTube better, then follow my Facebook page. My YouTube page as well. Be sure to like it. Share it with anybody, that you think could use it. As I said, this channel is not going to just be me talking about ADHD. It's going to be me doing whatever it is that my brain decides that we want to do. Sometimes I'll be out, shooting out footage out in the woods. And sometimes I'll, maybe I'll be in my classroom. Sometimes I may even use it because I've done a few YouTube videos for training purposes in my classroom. So this is going to be kind of a bit of a variety show. So if you're interested in continuing to watch, then again, please follow, like, share, and click those links on both Facebook and YouTube. So I hope this has been helpful and insightful. If there's any questions or anything that I didn't answer, please feel free to ask them in the comments, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. It may even prompt me to do another video at some point. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and a great rest of the week.